Smoke billowing from the federal court building downtown.
The morning of the bombing,
Debris, glass,
we dropped the boys off at daycare, and when the bomb went off, I ran down to Edie's office.
Sheriff's Deputy, here he comes. Mr. McVeigh! Mr. McVeigh!
And we turned and looked, and where the daycare was just a pancake pile of rubble. And where McVeigh parked the bomb truck, that's where we always parked to go take the babies upstairs.
The idea of a John Doe number 2 stems from Elliott's body shop in Kansas. Investigators say it was here Timothy McVeigh rented the Ryder truck used to hold the explosives. Employees thought McVeigh wasn't alone.
There was a $2 million reward offered for this man. And in just a few weeks, the FBI called off the manhunt.
In a 2005 interview, Nichols said, quote, clearly someone else was involved in renting the Ryder truck, that he knew the identity of John Doe number 2, but refused to reveal it.
You have to have a need to know. Well, I feel like I have a need to know. My grandchildren were killed.
All right, we are joined today by Kathy Sanders. Now, Kathy suffered in the Oklahoma City bombing, lost 2 grandchildren, Chase and Colton, and after this has become a preeminent investigator, one of the true heroes of this story. And she has this wonderful book, Shadows of Conspiracy, which I highly recommend, along with the book that got me into this, Blowback. These 2 books I recommend for everybody to check out, and both links will be in the description, because they show the parallel tracks of the investigation. There is a Jesse Trentadue path, battles that he has gone through after losing his brother, not seemingly related to Oklahoma City at all, and then Kathy's battle, which is directly related to her. Kathy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I have a theory as to why you did it, but I think you said this is fiction, or you identified the book as fiction early on. Was that to decrease liability issues or anything?
Well, no, it's kind of like the historical fiction. If you read a story about Abraham Lincoln or Thomas Jefferson or something, you create the dialogue of what went on according to the events that happened. And I created the dialogue with McVeigh and friends, and where I believed they were and what they were doing. And to pull those things off, there had to have been dialogue. So therefore, it's considered historical fiction. But I'll tell you this, the names have not been changed to protect the innocents, because there are no innocents in my book. I named the people I believe that were on the ground and who were in the bombing.
Thank you. And you bring a big point. And one thing I like is you address Timothy McVeigh is evil. I don't know any other way to put it. He was a monster, and he killed a lot of people. And a lot of the investigation goes into mishaps, poor choices, incompetence, and other things. So there's bad actions on all sides in this story from what I've seen. But I want to be careful, because sometimes people in the conspiracy world want to then paint, let's just say the ARA, for example, as these, heroes who are just going against the government. It's like, no, they're freaking thieves. They're not good people. Would you agree with that?
Uh, yeah, I think there were some evil things done, and there are some really bad people. And I think there were some good people probably that were misguided. You know, I I have a problem with the conspiracy theories. I was in an event last week, and uh, you know, I'm on the panel, and we're talking about a film we had just seen, and they were asking me, "Well, we think McVeigh is still alive." They cremated him and they got him out of there, and I'm thinking, this is what's happened to me over the years. I've tried to stay away from conspiracy theorists. That's just people who, oh, I think this might have happened, and then they run with it like the truth. And I'm telling those people, McVeigh is dead. I watched him die. And they still didn't believe it. I said, well, I saw him die and he laid there staring at the camera for 10 minutes without blinking his eye. So what I've done over the last 30 years is I've looked for evidence, and once I know something, then I can write about it and I can tell you about it. But I didn't have any preconceived ideas. I don't try to point the finger at people that are innocent. I try to go with um, the truth, and I've put the documents in my book, as you know, because you've read my book. Uh, McVeigh's phone records and his speeding tickets, and I've tried to connect the dots.
Thank you for doing that. And part of the reason is something else that I cover on another show a lot is the JFK assassination. And I cover it with my brother, my partner, Mark, brother. Jeez. I guess we've been at it so long that he's like a brother. But one of the problems we have is there very much was a cover up in the JFK assassination, we feel. However, the more crazy or outlandish or extreme the theories that come out, the better it is for the people who are covering things up.
Mhm.
Because if you go too far down these other theories, you can be dismissed out of hand. And what I deeply appreciate with you and Jesse Trentadue as well, because he has been chasing this with the law.
Yes.
This is the law. I am suing with this, the government. But he's very, very methodical and accurate. And with both of you, thank you very much for doing that because you're actually serving the narrative versus throwing things out there that people can then take, blow up, and then everybody's just laughed at. For
Yes.
example, I think you were involved with the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee, and that was kind of criticized by people who didn't want it to happen. Is that fair?
I It was. You know, there are people like the last interview that my husband Glenn Wilburn ever gave was with 2020. We sat with them, we showed them our evidence, we showed them the bomb squad had been downtown beforehand. We told them about the security cameras being uh, put under seal. And 2020 runs that episode. And afterwards, families that had lost loved ones in the bombing gathered against us with the local news, and they said, "The Wilburns need to shut up. They're gonna get McVeigh and Nichols off." And they were mad at us. So, for me, I've just done what I believe is the right thing to do. I think it was Edmund Burke that said, "Evil flourishes when good men do nothing." And for me, I needed to know the truth, and so I've pursued the truth.
Well, can we go back to that then? Because I believe what launched your book and your quest, right? Was you were having a memorial service for families who had lost loved ones, and I believe one of them told you, "Did you know that the bomb squad was in the area at the time?" Can you break that down?
I sure can. Uh, it was, right after the bombing. The whole world had reached out to love us, and I hadn't reached out to anyone, and I decided I would call all the families, the 19 families that lost their children, and then I invited them into my home for a dinner, and one of the young mothers whose son was killed said, the morning of the bombing, I saw the bomb squad down there," and we couldn't believe her. It's like, "Oh, how do you know? How do you know it was the bomb squad?" And she said they had big blue letters across their jacket. She said it very indignantly. The next day, my husband goes to the fire station and he asked the chief, "Did you all have prior warning? Was your bomb squad downtown before the bomb went off?" The fire chief said, "Oh, no, sir. We had no prior warning. Our truck wasn't down there." Well, then we found a whole office full of people who had seen the bomb squad, and they'd watched it in the alleyway from their office window. When confronted with that information, the chief calls a press conference and he says, "You know what? I made a mistake. Our guys were downtown. The bomb squad was downtown. They were just running routine errands and stopped to get a cup of coffee. But it wasn't just the bomb squad truck they were driving. They had the trailer with the bomb disposal unit on the back. And that caused us pause. And I suppose, Eric, I could have let it go at that. Okay, it's just a freaky thing. But then the largest manhunt in American history was going on for John
Mhm.
Doe number 2.
The idea of a John Doe number 2 stems from Elliott's body shop in Kansas. Investigators say it was here Timothy McVeigh rented the Ryder truck used to hold the explosives. Employees thought McVeigh wasn't alone.
There was a $2 million reward offered for this man. And in just a few weeks, the FBI called off the manhunt. And that caused me pause because I had learned there were 24 eyewitnesses that saw McVeigh downtown the morning at the bombing, and no one saw him alone. And many described the same dark skinned man, muscular build, tattoo on his arm, the ball cap with the flames. And that's what caused me to begin to investigate.
I had a question about that. I think I asked Margaret. I don't even remember anymore, but has anyone gone back to all those 24 witnesses with a photo spread of, for example, the ARA, et cetera? Because I feel like law enforcement wasn't really doing that. They wanted one guy, they had that guy, Timothy McVeigh, boom, boom, lock it up. But has anyone in after that point just gone around with the, you know, assorted headshots and mixed in with like Richard Guthrie and other people and confirm, hey, was this the other guy you saw?
Not to my knowledge. I did talk to most of those 24 people. And Mike Morose, who is working at Johnny's Tires at the corner of 5th and Harvey, he says that the bomb truck pulled into the parking lot. And at Johnny's Tires, when you pull into the parking lot, they come out to your vehicle to greet you. And Mike started walking toward the truck, and McVeigh jumps out of the truck and comes to Mike. He McVeigh's asking for directions downtown. Mike gave him the directions, and McVeigh goes and gets back in the truck. And Mike watches him as he gets in the truck with someone sitting in the passenger side. Interestingly enough, Mike reports what he's seen. The FBI calls Mike downtown. Mike actually identifies Timothy McVeigh out of a lineup. He knew who he saw, and he knew he could describe the second guy in the truck. But the FBI wound up saying, "You know what? Mike was just mistaken. There wasn't anybody in the truck. And all those 24 other people, they were just mistaken too." You know, 2 or 3 people could be mistaken, but 24? I don't think so.
No, I'm with Danny Colson on that
Yes.
actually.
Yes.
We have a quote from him, but that that bothered me from the beginning, just reading about it. And the reason is like I get it. Witnesses are the worst in the world, for reliability, etc. So if some said that the second guy was 6 foot tall and others say it's 5'8", and there was discrepancies on was it brown hair or black hair, all that would be cool. But the idea of creating a person who didn't exist, I think, is stretching credulity a bit far.
Yeah, and I don't think the FBI were interested in the other people. Let's go back to the Dreamland Motel. McVeigh stayed at the Dreamland the week before the bombing. He drove the bomb truck with the bomb in it from the front doors of the Dreamland to the Alfred P. Murrah building and blew up the building, okay? Well, McVeigh was there almost a week, and he was seen with numerous other individuals coming and going from his room. The owner saw him, the guests saw him, the housekeeper saw him when she brought towels. She brought towels. It wasn't McVeigh she gave the towels to. Even the Chinese food delivery man delivers food to McVeigh's room. It wasn't McVeigh he gave the food to. It's like, well, who was it? Why wouldn't the FBI want to identify those men? There there were good latent fingerprints taken from the Dreamland Motel, and there were good latent fingerprints taken from McVeigh's car that he escaped in after the bombing. And I watched while FBI agent Lewis Hupps testified under oath. He said, uh, the lawyer said, "Well, did you run those fingerprints through the FBI database for a check?" Agent Hupps said, "No, sir, I wasn't allowed to," very sheepishly. And the defense lawyer said, "Well, why in the world not?" And Agent Hupps says, "Well, I'm sorry, I was told it wasn't cost effective." Yet the FBI, the federal government spent $82.5 million investigating the Oklahoma City bombing and prosecuting McVeigh and Nichols, but they couldn't afford to run the fingerprints. Does does that add up to anyone?
And why not now? Run them now. And
Yeah.
they are on record. They have them. They could theoretically run them now, and don't tell me they cost any money because everything is so computerized and everything else that they could just go boop and find something out probably for less than a penny.
Yeah.
If that, it would just be, how whatever the person's salary is for type in the computer, the
Yeah.
search
Yeah.
phrase.
That's
But
right.
you bring up another thing that bothered me though, by talking about the Dreamland Motel.
Uh-huh.
In the book, really late in the book, but anyway, you described that Timothy McVeigh started to fill out the room info as Robert Kling or Bob Kling, but then changed his mind and did it as Timothy McVeigh. And this has bothered me because my thought is if he has enough operational, sense to use a fake ID to rent a vehicle, which is a little bit more intensive on identification because of insurance and things like that. Why would he not have done that at the motel? Why would he use his real name and then a real address of somebody that could trace back to him?
I don't know. I some things I don't have an answer to. I just know what happened and what didn't happen, and I
I
don't
mean,
know why
have
he
you ever
did it.
thought about that or did it ever bother you?
Well, it never bothered me. I don't know. I mean, the whole bombing thing bothers me,
Oh,
but but
yes.
the fact that he did that, I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what he was thinking when he blew up the building. I mean, I tried to get in his head, but so if I don't have an answer for something, I'll tell you, and I don't have that answer.
Well, maybe it is this, and it's a weird speculation, but there was a book written about Ted Bundy,
Mhm.
Stranger Beside Me, Anne Rule. That's right. That's who wrote it. She had commented that Ted Bundy had escaped from states that did not have the death penalty,
Mhm.
only to wind up finishing out in Florida and getting caught in Florida. And she had a theory that deep down he wanted to get caught, maybe, or subconsciously he wanted to get caught. So I don't know for sure, but maybe subconsciously Timothy McVeigh wanted to sign his work. I know he seemed to be proud of what he did
Yeah.
until the end. So maybe deep down he really wanted his name on it. I don't know. It's
Well,
just
I don't think he
odd.
wanted to share the glory, you know. I was with I went to the Aryan Nations because I knew Timothy McVeigh had been there and they had helped shape his hateful ideas. But as I attended a church service there, that you walk in and the people wipe their feet on a Israeli flag, and there's all sorts of racist propaganda around. There's no stained glass windows. There's Nazi flags hanging over the windows, and at the front of the church, there's a life-size bust of Adolf Hitler. And when the pastor Butler got up to present the sermon, he said God had laid him a new sermon on his heart. And he looked at me and he said, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter." And Timothy McVeigh was a great man and a martyr for the cause. And he said he even wept when he saw the little Aryan grandchildren, my little Aryan grandchildren on TV. No one ever called my grandchildren Aryan grandchildren. But I think that's the kind of glory that Tim was willing to go to his death for. Most people don't realize um, Stephen Jones gave McVeigh a lie detector test, and he failed it when asked, did you pull this bomb off alone the morning of April 19th? And he said, yes. Well, his answer showed to be deceitful. Uh, and Jones told him, Tim, I think you're lying to me. I want you to tell me who the other people are. And McVeigh said, well, would it make any difference in my case? And Jones says, well, probably not. And then Tim just clammed up and never said another thing. He was willing to take the hit. He liked all the glory of being the infamous Timothy McVeigh.
If you take Tim McVeigh's words at face value and you take the words of the other 3 employees at Elliott's Body Shop, there is another person present.
And in these just released court documents from his jail cell, Terry Nichols is backing the story.
As sick as it is, he was going to be executed no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably figured that if he could be the lone guy who did it all, he would go out with the glory, I guess, which
He would be remembered.
a leg was found in the remains, but all legs had been accounted for with 168 people.
Let me tell you what I do know about the leg.
Yes, please.
In 1995, there was no DNA testing. And I believe it was in 2011 that the Washington Times wrote an article that they had, the FBI had taken the leg and done some forensic testing. It was LabCorp that did the forensic testing on the leg. And the problem was they only ran the DNA results from that leg against the 168 people that died in the building. Eric, I've been trying to get the DNA testing released to me because I would like to run it through a database so we could find out who that person was, who were their relatives.
Now, there were some articles that came out, I believe in the New York Times, that they identified the leg as an Air Force veteran in Texas or something like that. And they had to
Letitia Levy, and she was buried in New Orleans, and they exhumed
New
her
Orleans.
body. And
But then they found that there was a leg in her coffin that was the wrong leg.
that's
So
right.
she got buried with the wrong leg, but that part never came up. It seems like the story sort of died on the vine with, hey, they found the DNA match, they exhumed the body, and they put the leg together. But apparently, no, there were 2 legs with her. So there's still an unaccounted for leg. Am I
That's right.
correct?
That's right.
And that is the leg that you're hoping to get the DNA testing on, correct?
Yes, I'd like it released to me. I've written twice, and you have to have a need to know. Well, I feel like I have a need to know. My grandchildren were killed, but I haven't been able to this point to get the DNA released to me.
While we're talking about that and a need to know, I believe Dan Browning and his dog Gunny were among witnesses to them removing cameras from the building. Entire cameras, not just the tape, but like
Yes.
literally pulling off the
Mhm.
whole units
Uh-huh.
and taking them down at a weird juncture because there was literally somebody trapped down below and they were keeping first responders away, but they were getting cameras off,
Yes,
which
that's
seems
what
an odd priority.
yeah. That's what Don Browning thought. He's down there and they stopped the rescue operation to get these cameras. And and then the judge from I think it was 22 cameras they took from around the area that would show the bomb truck pulling up and the people or McVeigh getting out of it. He put them under seal. That's what Jesse Trinidad, he's been fighting with. He's had a federal ongoing case, and the federal judge told the FBI, release the tapes. And at first, the FBI said, oh, we don't have any tapes. There never were any tapes. And then Jesse comes up with the documents that their own people, a Secret Service report. It says that he's watching the tape and he records what he saw. And he says he sees the truck pull up to the front of the building. and then he sees the suspects, plural, exit the truck. Well, the only tape that was released to the public has about a 6-minute malfunction. And it was about 8:56 or so. When the truck pulled up, the camera malfunctioned. Then at 9:03, the bomb went off at 9:02. At 9:03, the camera starts functioning again. And it's clear that that piece was just removed from the tape. So the FBI said there were no tapes. Jesse proved there were, and now the FBI says, "Oh, well, we've lost them.
Mm.
We've
Yeah,
lost."
he said there, I think actually were up to 12 cameras that coincidentally
Yeah,
were resetting at the same, like as the truck went by, I guess it had an EMP device on it that just said, boom, knock out the camera, knock out the camera, knock out the camera. And then the cameras restarted once it had
yeah,
passed.
yeah. Who can believe
Uh,
that?
it does again strain credulity. And I am frustrated by the idea of it is 30 years plus after the incident. One person's already been executed, another one is in prison for life. According to your investigation, FBI, etc., it's wrapped up. This case is closed. They're in time. So why can we not look at the videotapes? Why can they not be released? This is case closed. It's done. So it doesn't make sense why things are being withheld.
Well, I'll tell you something else that doesn't make sense. You read about it in my book about the 60 Minutes interview.
Mhm.
Terry Nichols, the Oklahoma City bomber, uh, stood for the federal trial because, people wanted to see him executed. Well, at the federal trial, the jury couldn't decide how guilty he was. He said, "Yeah, we know he's guilty, but who were those people seen with McVeigh and Nichols out at Gary Lake building the bomb?" And uh, so when the federal trial was over, Nichols was brought back to Oklahoma because McVeigh and Nichols were only tried for the 8 federal agents that died in the building. So
Mhm.
Oklahoma brought him back to prosecute him for the 160 other people that died in the building, and they were hoping to execute him. But they had the same problem that the federal trial did. Yeah, he's guilty, but who are these other people? They wanted to know more. So he got life in prison. But while he was waiting for his trial, those 2 years he was in the county jail, um, he wrote me a letter. The letter turned into phone calls, and I began to go up and visit him. So Terry and I became friends. I mean,
Awkward.
it was awkward,
Yeah.
friends, but I was willing to dance with the devil to get to the truth, and who's gonna know more about the bombing than Terry Nichols? So, 60 Minutes wanted to do something, just like they had done with McVeigh. They did an interview, Ed Bradley did, and they wanted to interview Terry Nichols as well. Well, when 60 Minutes approached Terry, Terry told him, "Well, yeah, I'll do an interview for you, but only if Kathy conducts it." He told me he didn't trust Ed Bradley to put him in a good light, and he thought that I would. So they were gonna do something they'd never before done in the history of the show. I was gonna go into Florence, Colorado, the prison that houses the worst criminals in the United States, the most dangerous. I was gonna go interview Terry Nichols, and then when I came out, Ed Bradley was gonna interview me about my interview. But the warden would never the 60 Minutes and I wrangled with the prison for a year and a half, and I met the prison's criteria as a journalist for 60 Minutes. But the warden deemed me a security threat to the inmates, to the staff, and to the general public, and he would not allow me to go in and do the interview.
It's that red hair.
What? It's the
It's
red
that red
hair.
hair. Very
Well,
dangerous red hair.
yeah, I guess I'm pretty dangerous. My criminal record, I do have a speeding ticket. That's the only criminal record. I don't know how I could be a danger to anyone. So Terry was very frustrated and he calls me and he says, "You know what? I'm going to tell you everything." Because he promised me that after his federal trial and his state trial, he would tell me everything. And he wanted to keep his promise. And he said, "You go to 60 Minutes on this date, and I'm going to call you." And he could request a phone to make a phone call on a date, but he didn't know what time they'd bring their phone to his cell. So when I got to 60 Minutes, the producer said, "Ed Bradley's very sick. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do the story, but we don't want to wait any longer. It's been a year and a half." So they hooked my phone up and hooked me up, and I'm sitting on the 60 Minutes set for several hours. And then the producer came in and said, "I'm so sorry, but Ed Bradley has just died. We're going to have to shut the set down." Well, I was sad because I had met Ed, and I hated to see the 60 Minutes family grieving, but I kind of regrouped because several times over this 30-year journey, it's been a roller coaster experience. I get so close to getting to the truth and getting it exposed. And it's like, well, it's okay. I don't care if it's on 60 Minutes or not. He's going to call me and he's going to tell me everything. He didn't call that night. I go back to Arkansas, and in a couple of days, Terry's mother calls me and she said, "Kathy, Terry wanted you to know that on the day he was to call you, that he was notified by the warden, you were taken off his calling list." Okay, the man had been talking to me for 10 years on the phone, and the day says he's gonna tell me everything, I was taken off his calling list, and I haven't talked to him since. Now, I don't think Eric the warden would care what he had to say, but somebody somewhere did, don't you think?
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. I would love to see the warden, get a deposition from the warden. Who told you this? Who told you what?
Mhm.
Why didn't you do it? I think you said in the book that if Ed Bradley couldn't do the interview, Katie Couric was,
That
scheduled to be.
that's what the producer said.
Well, I was gonna say it's kind of ironic because you did a or fulfilled in a weird way because you were in a HBO documentary, I believe, that Katie Couric produced, last year?
Years later, the two women are now exploring the lasting impact of the attack in a new HBO documentary titled An American Bombing: The Road to April 19th. Sanders' life forever changed beyond measure.
Yes, that's right. Let me tell you how that went down. The, producers from the show called me. They were gonna do a story about domestic terrorism in the United States, and they wanted to come see me because I was a victim of the first domestic terrorism. So they came out from New York to Arkansas. They do the interview with me, the kind of feel good piece. And uh, when they're done, I said, "You guys are missing the story." And they said, "Well, how's that?" And I took him downstairs to my documents room and I started opening up evidence files and I started showing them the stuff I had amassed. And they came back several more times, and their story went from being a domestic terrorism story to the road to April 19th, which is the day of the bombing. And it sheds light about a lot of the things that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, it's a very good documentary. I do recommend everybody
Mhm.
check it out. I just thought it was interesting that, you kind of 20 something years later do collaborate with Katie Couric after a
Well,
fashion.
and not only that, she was the first interview that my daughter and I ever did. Uh, the bombing happened on the 19th, and they picked us up around 4 or 5 in the morning. Uh, Katie Couric sent a limousine for us, and we were taken back down to the bomb scene, and we were on a rooftop. And, oh, it was cold and the wind was blowing, but that was our first introduction to interviews, and it was with Katie Couric, and she stayed on the story ever since. I think I did a piece with her on the 5-year anniversary and maybe the 10-year anniversary, but, uh, yeah, she's been entwined in this story.
Well, bringing Edie into it, your daughter, she played an important role too. I believe that kind of spurred on JD Cash into the case, and that was a CNN interview. She confronted the reporters about the ATF, and wait a minute, did they know that they weren't to go to work that day? And if so, why weren't we told we could go to work that day? Um, can you talk about that?
Well, yes, they imploded the building on May 23rd, just uh, almost to the day, a month after the bombing. And we had learned the bomb squad had been downtown. Uh, we had been we had learned at the fire department that, and even at the courthouse, they had been a memo had been sent out to these agencies around the building to be on high alert for terrorist activity, but nobody warned us. And then there was a fellow by the name of Bruce Shaw that gave an interview that his wife worked at the credit union and he went downtown to find her the day of the bombing. And uh, he stopped an ATF agent because he knew all the ATF agents knew his wife because they were there in the same building and they banked there. And he said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Terry. Where could she be?" And this agent says, "I'm sorry, we were notified by our pagers and told not to come to work." And so I don't know. I don't know where the ATF was. I can tell you this though, Eric. Um, the morning of the bombing, we dropped the boys off at daycare, and Edie and I worked in the same building. And when the bomb went off, I ran down to Edie's office and someone opened the door and said, "They just blew up the bank." And I said, "Edie, let's go see." So we run down 3 flights of stairs and out the front door of the building, and there was big sheets of plate glass falling down all around us. There wasn't a car running in the street running. Uh, they were all still. And I looked toward the bank, and the bank is intact. And Edie saw that, and then she was going to run back in where it was safe. I looked up the street, and I saw the smoke rising from the Murrah. And I said, "Edie, the babies." And we took off running. We got to the south side of this building and I'm saying, "Edie, wait up, wait up." And we're standing there and we're surveying the damage, trying to figure out what happened. The blinds were just kind of blowing in the breeze. The windows were out, but the building was intact. Then we hear boom, 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 and we see all this black billowing smoke. And we run off around to the north side of the building. When we got to the north side of the building, it was the cars in the parking lot blowing up. Well, and we turned and looked, and where the daycare was just a pancake pile of rubble. And where McVeigh parked the bomb truck, that's where we always parked to go take the babies upstairs. We didn't have enough sense to go back to the south side of the building and try to get into the building. We were on the north side, and we began to climb the rubble. And it was a jacketed ATF agent that kept me out. He grabbed my shoulder and he said, "Ma'am, you can't go up there." And I'm thinking, "ATF, ATF, who's that? And does he have the power to keep me out of here?" Well, I later learned uh, that the ATF had brought in agents from out of town, out of state, from around the country. And they will admit that they were working on a sting operation the night before the bombing, but they won't admit that it was at the Murrah building. They never told us who it was there. But
Which sting operation were you
yeah,
working,
yeah,
guys?
which one? But so I think that agent was probably one of them. Uh, one of the smartest things I ever did, Eric, after the bombing, when the families gathered against us because we were asking questions and they were afraid we were going to get Nichols and McVeigh off, I went to Stephen Jones, McVeigh's defense attorney, and I said, "Look, if you want to point the finger at the other people that are involved in the bombing, I'll help you." And it wound up I was an asset for the Jones investigative team because nobody wanted to help McVeigh. No one wanted to talk to his defense team.
Sure.
But I could go as a victim and they would tell me things. And I opened some doors that they perhaps wouldn't have had opened otherwise. But it also gave me access to their discovery and the materials they had. I can remember when I got McVeigh's phone records and I saw he had uh, called Elohim City 2 weeks before the bombing, 2 minutes after calling the Ryder Truck Company. I remembered calling the reporters that I had worked with. One was an executive from NBC News, and I started sharing, here's the phone records. I'm trying to get them to pay attention to this story. Because by the time the building was imploded, we were getting scared that, you know, they might do something to us because we're not backing down. And we thought the more exposure we had, the safer we would be.
Right. I believe Glenn was in the habit of recording conversations,
That's right.
etc. And I imagine putting the tape in safe places
Mm-hmm.
in case something happened. Um, Speaking of some of the fears or whatever, you were in a documentary called Murder in the Heartland a ways back. And in that documentary, fairly late in it, you talked about your mail being tampered with.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I this story, there's so many things and that I just let drop, but it really irritated me. After the bombing, we were getting mail from all around the country, huge amounts. Some of it would just be to the redhead who lost the children, and the post office could get it to us. And we were getting boxes full of uh, letters. And one said, you know, little Timmy wanted you to have this $2, you know, and uh, so people were they were sending money to try to defray the funeral expenses and that kind of thing. And within just a few days, the Red Cross starts delivering our mail. And all of our mail was opened. Everything was opened, and after the Red Cross started delivering our mail, there was never 5 cents in the mail. There was never a check, there was never anything. It was unbelievable. I can remember the man that made one of the deliveries. It's like, "How come all our mail's open?" And he was kind of embarrassed about it, but, that really disillusioned me with, the Red Cross, so
Wow. Yeah. So somebody had pointed that out to me, and I definitely want to run by. So that has to also be a little bit creepy too, that somebody's going through. Never mind the monetary aspects, but it's almost like you're being monitored. I think you even installed a high level security system just to make sure that nobody was visiting your house. Was that for the ARA types, Aryan Republican Army types, or is that for the feds, or was actually a little bit of both?
I think it was probably for a little bit of both. I don't think we weren't very popular Oklahomans at the time, you know. I think we'd made people the federal agents, some of them. And I'll stop here and say, Eric, I think there's a lot of great FBI agents. I think there's a lot of good ATF agents. Uh, but in this case, there are a few that dropped the ball and it cost 168 people their lives.
Yes, and there's some gross behavior. So let's go back to ATF on that day. Now, it was reported by many people that there were no ATF personnel in the building. And from what I understand, two came forward to say, no, no, that's not true. Um, I I was in the building and I was trapped in an elevator or something like that. And another one had gone through heroic measures to karate chop through a wall or something and was severely injured. Can you tell me
Yeah,
about things?
let me tell you about him.
ATF agent Luke Franey claimed that he was knocked unconscious by the blast and, after an aborted helicopter rescue, crawled onto an outside ledge to escape his office. Franey reported that he then used his martial arts skills to break through several walls and injured his hand. Another agent, Alex McCauley, claimed that he was in an elevator at the time of the bombing. After free falling for 5 floors, Macaulay supposedly broke out and rescued several people.
He was trapped up on the 9th floor, and, there's 168 dead people below him. His office was just blown away. He's standing there at the blown out window with a little silver lockbox, and he's waving it out the window, this lockbox. Now, Eric, would you not think there's something really important in that lockbox?
It's possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I went to that agent and I said, "What in the world was in the lockbox?" And he said, "I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to discuss it." Well, when the 2020 people came, they had an investigator that was ex um, FBI, and he took the ATF agent to lunch, and he said, "What was in that lockbox that Wilburns have that picture of you? What was in it?" And he said, it was $150 worth of my children's savings bonds." Now, does that is that what you would be concerned about if the building had blown up and there were 150 dead or 168 people dead below you? And if that were the case, why couldn't he have told me that? You know, I I don't understand. To this day, I don't understand why he couldn't answer that.
That is curious. And what about the one who was trapped in the elevator?
Well, there were 2 men trapped in the elevator, but the elevator company that, uh, installed those elevators and maintained them and came, I don't know, monthly or whatever to just check on the elevators. They were immediately on the scene, and the agents in the elevator said that they free fell several stories, and then the elevator stopped, and then they got out. And, the men that owned the elevator company said that didn't happen. They pried the doors opened on the elevator, and they said, uh, if the elevator had free fallen, it would be like jumping off a 9-story building. They would have been dead. So I don't know what happened, but according to the elevator experts, that did not happen.
Okay, so just so I know, were there any ATF employees working that day in the office?
I think the secretary was.
Secretary. Okay.
Mm.
But as far as agents go, it appears not.
Appears not. I don't know what Luke Franey, if he was up there or if he went back in the building maybe to get the lockbox. I don't know what happened with Luke Franey, but he was up there and he had the silver lockbox.
Now, didn't Luke Franey claim to be seriously injured?
He did. Mhm.
But isn't there footage of him seemingly
The sheriff's video
ambulatory?
af yes, the sheriff's video the day of the bombing shows, Luke shaking hands with whoever it was that rescued him. Now, after the building was imploded on May the 23rd, and Edie made her comments about she wanted to know where the hell was the ATF, uh, the Pat Ryan, the U.S. attorney, and ATF agents and FBI showed up at our door, and Luke Franey was among them, and his hand was all bandaged. This is a month later, and it was bandaged from the chopping out of the building. But in the video I saw, he was shaking hands with the same hand.
Maybe he was the one with the lockbox, right?
Yes.
Maybe he injured himself after that when he went up to find the lockbox and had to chop something to get it open.
Who
Just a
knows?
weird theory, but
Yeah.
it is troubling, along with the cameras being taken down and all of this. So they bring a lot of questions. Now, I wanted to ask you about Carol Howe, and I wanted to explore that because one, tragically, she died this year, I guess, in a house fire. It's not much that I've seen on that. I saw like a little footage that there was a house fire, but no other real information. Can you tell me about Carol? Because I've I've read your book. I've listened to Debutante, which has kind of a different presentation of Carol. And I would just like to know, what do you think? What was your relationship? And was she on the up and up, or was she a con person? What was her story?
Well, let me tell you about Carol Howe. I learned about her when I was working with the Jones defense team and or the McVeigh defense team, and found out, hey, look, here's an informant working at Elohim City, and look at her reports. She's telling them that these people are planning a bombing. She said in December of 94, before the bombing in April of 95, that she had gone on 3 different trips, scouting trips, to target buildings that these people were planning on blowing up. And that caused me concern, of course, because I'm thinking, well, if they had this information, why didn't they do anything? And she said that one of the men that were going on these scouting trips to find these buildings was a fellow by the name of Andreas Strassmeyer. And 2 weeks before the bombing, McVeigh calls Elohim City and he asked to speak to Andreas Strassmeyer. Strassmeyer was allowed to leave the country without being interviewed about the bombing, and he wasn't interviewed till more than a year later when he had returned home to Germany. But the FBI interviewed McVeigh's second grade school teacher, but they didn't think it was important to interview Strassmeyer. So when I
And
learned
Strassmeyer is known as Andy the German.
Andy the German,
Correct.
that's right. So when I learned about Carol, I've met with Carol on a number of occasions, and she cried. She said, "I'm sorry, I tried to stop it. I tried to stop it," and she was really guilt-ridden. Uh, when I first met her, she still had the Nazi swastika on her arm. Uh, one of my later trips, I found her living in Las Vegas. This was after the trials and after her trial, and she had tried to get that swastika removed, but now there was just those big red keloid scars over, but it was still a swastika. She had changed her name to Christian Nicole Wolf, and, lucky for Carol, in a way, she had a rich daddy that was able to support her all those years, and just a few months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, she died mysteriously in a house fire. Her neighbor from across the street said that, she moved in there 4 years ago and never came out. She was a real recluse. I guess she had her groceries and stuff delivered, and, there was an investigation about what happened there, and they said that she was a hoarder and that, an electric heater started the fire, but the house was so full, she didn't have a path to get out. And I could see how she would become a recluse because she was scared of the government and she was scared of the people at Elohim City and the people that she had snitched on. Her She had a miserable life.
Wow. Wow.
But to your question, when I first met her, I think it was easy for Carol to fit in because she was a little Nazi. Uh, she had been attacked, she said, by some, black youth, and she called that dial a racist hotline, and she got involved with Dennis Mahon, and Dennis Mahon is the one that took her to Elohim City, and that's uh, how
He's another bomb baker, by the way, just so people know.
Yes, that's right, that's right. I think people will be shocked when they read the ending of my book, of how I believe.
Yeah, I'm not going to spoil it, but your ending matches what I think, my theory. It,
Well,
it, it
I
just,
wasn't gonna tell the ending, but I want people to know that Shadows of Conspiracy is not a poor grandma that lost her kids. It it's so much more than this. I'm told it's a real page turner, and it's a thrilling crime story, and I think, I wanna share everything that I've found out with the public because I believe Americans have the right to know, and if you think you know the truth about the Oklahoma City bombing, you need to read my book.
yeah. So back to Carol Howell a little bit, because there's two claims about her injuries,
Mm-hmm.
her broken feet.
Yes.
Um, One was, from her ex-husband, somebody who was briefly married to, that she had jumped off of a monument or something and broke her feet in it. And then she had told a story that she was attacked by black youths or what have you. Which of those do you feel is accurate? Do you think she was attacked by black youth, or she may have?
I think she
Uh,
very possibly could have been, because that's what uh, led her to dial a racist hotline, and I think it kind of formed her opinions at that time.
and you talked with her on and off through the years, so I obviously you knew how to get a hold of her, or you had that information. I see you as kind of like a connector. I think you probably know more people involved, including like Jesse Trinta do. I came to learn that when JD Cash informed him about his brother Ken and went over the description, you were in the room with JD Cash at the time.
Yeah, he was sitting at my bar in my kitchen, and when he made the call. Yeah, I've known all the players, and I've tried to stay with the people that I believe I felt were credible and real, because it's such a hindrance for people that just make up stories and go with it as though it's the truth.
Which I appreciate. And Andy the German, Andy Strassmeyer, there was a lot of questions about him, and he has popped up here and there for interviews. One of which was with Ken Silva,
Mhm.
who I've also spoken to. Um, Very interesting thing about Andy is in his interviews, he's saying that no, he's really not anti-Semitic, as an example. Now, you talked about the Aryan nations with the Israel flag on the ground and people wiping their feet and stuff. From what I understand, Elohim City and the Aryan nations both did not necessarily love Jewish people.
Yeah, that's true, a very accurate statement.
Well, I just want to make sure that it's both of them because there's different beliefs or whatever. But I've never known people who were Nazi oriented who like Jews.
Mhm.
And Andy, in his interviews, kind of played it down like, oh, they're sort of right wing, and he literally called himself a Zionist who has traveled back and forth to Israel, and I think he even had a girlfriend in Israel. So that seems to be more problematic even than Terry Nichols dating a Filipino. Am I correct?
I think so. I don't know how you I don't know how to trust Andres Straussmeyer and what he has to say. He did a interview, with a guy from London. He wrote a book.
John Watson, I
No,
believe.
mhm,
Oh no, Pritchard, Ambrose
Andrew
Pitch.
Ambrose Pritchard. Yeah,
Yeah, that's it.
because he Pritchard even writes about uh, my family in his book. But Straussmeyer would give hypotheticals. Well, what do you think? I don't think that he was answering the questions like in third person, but
Mhm.
Andrew believed that he was talking about himself. So,
That 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 makes sense. And he was asked about Ambrose Pritchard in the interview with Ken Silva, and he claims that Pritchard made that all up,
no,
and he
he didn't make it
confronted
up.
him for
I heard the
tapes.
tapes. I heard Pritchard
Ah,
recorded them, and I heard the tapes.
very interesting because Strassmeyer claimed that it was never recorded. So
No, I know,
that's interesting.
I know, because I've heard some of those tapes.
Well, this is why I'm asking all of these questions because I feel like I see one thing and I hear another thing, and I just want to see how things line up. But that's very interesting. So they were in fact recorded.
I maybe there's
Mm.
I heard tapes that Andrew Pritchard made with Strassmeyer. Perhaps all of them weren't, but I heard some.
Right. Well, that would,
Hmm.
go against the claim that nothing was recorded. Now, it could be theoretically,
Well,
two statements weren't recorded, but
perhaps Andrew
okay.
didn't tell him.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
So very, very interesting. Let me see. I would love to have you back and dig even more into this, but I guess I'd like to wrap up with a question I always want to ask. There's two variants. One is either what is the one question that I should have asked you and I neglected to, or if not that, what is one question? Now you've done how many? I don't know how many interviews. You've been Katie Kirk, everybody in the world. What is one question you're waiting for somebody to finally ask you?
Um, you can ask me about or on the next show, you can ask me about my interview with Danny Colson.
I would love that. Okay. I I think that's a perfect place to button up, and I definitely want to know anything and everything about your interview with Danny. And
It'll leave your viewers reeling.
well, and some of it's in the book, so you always can you can get ahead of it by grabbing the book. Again, link in the description. Shadows of Conspiracy. And Kathy, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Eric.